I can hear you guys and I can see you. Can you hear me? Hello, Bill. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thanks for coming on and doing this. Really looking forward to talking to you. I've heard so much about you and realized that we've got some people in common besides Chris, who introduced us. Curtis. I worked with Curtis a couple of years ago at the Irish Arts Centre, of all places, with Cassandra Wilson. And a couple of crazy coincidences. Cassandra's name before she got married was the same name as Curtis has now, Fawkes, and
Wow,
and
that's
and everyone just assumed that Cassandra brought in Curtis and Liam
her
O'Mahony, the
brother.
Irish guy, but it was the other way around. Liam, the Irish guy, brought him in.
That's funny.
So I'm anticipating a lot of questions from people listening in because of there's such a wide range. I feel like I'm picking flowers from this mass garden here, with all that you've done and continue to do. But you know what I really loved reading your bio was the detail, and this is, I think the name it was saved under was the short version. It's about, I blew it up in size so I could read without my glasses, but we got. I love the kind of detail that you go into here in terms of what you feel somebody else might have, a publicist might have left off. An example I give is at the age of 9, playing drums for a local production of the Pajama Game. You know that the
My first
dedication.
gig.
That's a lot of people. You know, a publicist might say we need to shave this down and just we want the big names on here. That's all they want. But that's first of all, it means you're playing drums at age 9 and playing well enough to play in a production, a musical where the demands playing in a pit are knowing when to come in and being able to focus and stay paying attention. You must have been a very alert young 9-year-old, were you?
Well, to his credit, my dad actually. I was kind of a shy kid in some aspects, especially in terms of going outside of my comfort range, which pretty much was my bedroom in the backyard.
Right.
But my parents were pretty pushy, and they often pushed me outside of my comfort range. And my dad insisted that I try every little opportunity that came my way, because you never know the exposure and the opportunities. You never know when they're going to come, so you got to take them. Anyway, he pushed me into it, and my dad came to every rehearsal, and he came to every performance. And in the rehearsals, he would sit next to me, and because there was no book, this was totally improvised pit orchestra, and the bass player, it was a trio, I believe, and the piano and bass player, they had a book, but there was no drums. The book for the drums was completely by ear, and I had no idea what to play. So my dad told me everything what to play, and he would sing the beats to me with his mouth or show me with his hands what the beats were, and you got to do a drum roll here, and sound effects, cymbal crash, and he would tell me what to do. And then once we rehearsed it a couple of times, I would have it down. So he was
And you got
pretty.
to remember all those cues, though. You know,
I had a good memory then. I don't know what happened now. Now I have a terrible memory. I can't remember anything. But from age, I guess, 6 to about 18, I can remember everything from then. Past the age of 18, it started to go down.
it's a funny thing about music and memory, actually, because I would have these. I was talking with Sal Crocker, Celino Clark's son, who's an airline pilot, and I was describing. I said I don't want people to misunderstand me and say I remember everything, because I don't. But when I remember a chunk of something, and I said the detail I remember it in, and he just looked at me and said, "You remember in 3D." He said, "So the musical memory I find is prompted and triggered, because if I'm, let's say we knew one another from years back, I could be telling a whole bunch of stories from that time, and you would be there and you go, no, you know what also happened, and that would send me down a whole bunch of other stuff
Yeah.
that starts come racing back. And I suppose as we get older, that you're probably having to be reminded more. But I find the same thing happens with tunes. That if I'm playing very regularly, performing, tunes start to come back. So I'm wondering, given all the different musical things that you've done, do you find that you're surprised at how quickly something comes back when you revisit a project?
Um, in terms of listening to it, yes, but I have a funny way with music. It's funny when I have dreams or when I remember things of past things, I almost hardly ever remember the music, the playing, unless something really unusual happened. What I do remember is the announcers. What I do remember is certain emotional things that occurred in the periphery of the performance. But the actual notes, the actual performances, I don't think I remember one thing. It's very odd.
Yeah, I wouldn't remember solos I improvised
Yeah,
because I think you're in a
I
certain
don't
mindset. Yeah.
can't remember it, but I know what you're saying. Like once you're in the heat of battle and you're playing, it's very easy for one thing to trigger another thing. I think uh, like people who really know the technical aspects of this taught me like the compacting of things, and one thing will trigger one little detail will trigger a whole bunch of details because they tend to compress. Compression is what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
They compress as you get older. Memories compress until they're down to one little detail. And if somebody sparks that detail, then the compression opens up, and then you remember all the little things around her. Recently, my brother-in-law sent me a whole slew of photographs that he dug out of his attic or some box somewhere, and or maybe my parents' house. We just recently brought all of their stuff. They both passed last year.
Oh, I'm
We
sorry.
have all this stuff. Thank you. You have all this stuff, you know, that some of it we haven't seen in who knows 50 years or whatever. And so he sent me a bunch of photographs and triggered a lot of memories that like you said, that I had completely forgot about, performance that I had done, places I had played that I completely just forgot about, and then it triggered the memory. And I look at the photos and I remember a lot of the guys' names that I played with, even though I didn't remember the specific event. If somebody mentioned it, I wouldn't remember it, but seeing the photo, then I remembered it, which triggered a whole lot of other memories. And it's very interesting, that whole
You
phenomenon.
might know through the years. Did you ever come across Barry Miles at all? Have you guys crossed musically? He's a pianist. He was a drummer in his younger years, but he at 11 he did a concert with Wayne Shorter in Newark, and a trio. There was just bass, him, and Wayne, and they were put together by some promoter. And he remembers Wayne saying, that night that he was playing drums at the time, but years later he made the switch to piano in his late teens. Which he was always playing, but he put the drum days behind him. But he said that that night Wayne said, this guy's very, we got to keep our eye on this guy, talking about the promoter. We got to make sure we get paid, and he just didn't get a good feeling about him. And so years later, Barry ends up being Roberta Flack's music director, and they're on the bill with Weather Report, and he goes down to see Wayne. This is the whole memory thing coming to light now. He goes to introduce himself, and he says, "I did a concert with you in Newark when I was 11." And he goes, "Oh yeah, that guy was a shady guy." He said all these years later, Wayne went straight back to that.
Yeah, that's the same thing that I've experienced, is that I remember certain things that I'm sure a lot of musicians probably have a similar kind of thing. Like I did a jam session, and who hasn't done a jam session with Roy Hargrove?
Yes, yeah, I did
Jam
too.
session. If there's a jam session, I think there were actually 7 Roy Hargroves, because he would show up at every jam session there was in New York City. But I did a jam session once, and I think Joe Locke. It was at the old Vigionis. And
Okay,
Joe
yeah.
Locke was, I guess, the curator, you would call it, of the jam session. And I stepped up to play, and Joe barely knew me at the time. I think he did know me, but he barely, we didn't really know each other like we do now. So I stepped up to play the vibes, and Joe had just played, and and they were shuffling out some new players, and Roy Hargrove was one of the new players. And I had heard of him, of course, but I mean, he wasn't as big as he is now. This was maybe late 80s, 89 or something, maybe even 90. I think maybe 89, because I don't think I was living in New York yet. I didn't move to New York City until 89.
That's when I moved, actually. I moved here in November 89.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's right around the time I moved, too. So I get up there to play, and I guess by habit, Joe shut off. He had a really nice vibraphone with pickup system, and I was used to playing with the pickup system. I had just gotten my pickup system and was getting used to that. And Joe had a beautiful pickup system on his vibes, but just out of habit, he shut off the pickup system and shut off his amp. So when I went to play, hardly any sound came out. So I get up there, right, to play. So Roy says, "Oh, what do you want to play?" Everybody's ready to play. And I said, "Let's play Donna Lee." He says, "Okay, cool." So I counted off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Like up tempo. Because I was really young and I'm gonna show you this attitude. So I counted way up here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and I go to hit the first note. Nothing comes out of the instrument, and Roy is playing the head all by himself, which of course he nailed, no problem. And I'm fiddling around, looking at the bars like, "Oh, what happened?" I finally figured it out. Maybe Joe Locke came up to help me out, realizing what he had done. So anyway, I get around, we finished the tune, right? And Roy's like, yeah, man. I was like, "Man, you're killing it, bro." And he's like, "Yeah, you sound good, man. You sound good. But you left me hanging there, man.
He thought it was you.
And every time I saw him from that point on, he said, "Hey, how you doing, man? Good to see you. Man, you left me hanging." I never forget that one time you left me hanging, man.
He never found out that it wasn't your fault. No.
And another story like that, back before Kenny Garrett was Kenny Garrett, he's from Jersey, and I'm from Jersey. And he was like a young up and coming guy on the scene. And I think I wasn't even out of high school yet. And I was playing way over my head with some guys. And very rare, mostly I was known as a bass player. Most of the people in New Jersey didn't even know that I played bass because nobody needed a vibraphone player. Jazz gigs were sparse anyways in New Jersey. And it was a very small clique of people that had all the gigs. And I wasn't one of them. And my bass playing was kind of anyway, pretty meh anyways. And I didn't know that many tunes, which was really the death knell. If you didn't know 1,000 standards, you weren't going to work. So, and I didn't know that many tunes, and my playing was kind of But every once in a while, somebody couldn't make a gig or somebody didn't show up, and they would give me a call. And I got a call from this guy who kind of liked me, and he would give me a call every now and then. So I did a gig with him, and Kenny Garrett was sitting in. It was a jam session thing, and Kenny Garrett came and sat in, and I was kind of nervous because he was, wow, Kenny Garrett, and I didn't know that many tunes, but this guy had a lot of original stuff, which was really more my thing. So original tunes, you guys usually had charts for, and I would do my homework. So people a lot of guys don't want to do the homework, and I liked doing the homework. So I would get those kind of gigs. And Kenny shows up and he sits in on a tune, and the guy said, "All right, let's do a blues," So I was like, "Cool, that I can do in all 12 keys." So he calls it blues, and I thought, "Wow, Kenny Garrett, man, Kenny Garrett." I mean, he wasn't even that known then, but in Jersey he was very well known as like the guy, in the younger guys, and so I thought. In my mind, oh man, I got to be ultra hip to play behind him. So I started playing altered chords for everything. I didn't play anything really like straight up standard. I just threw every kind of altered substitution I could find that I knew of. And Kenny was doing his thing. He sounded amazing. And then afterwards he said, "Man, you kept throwing them out chords." And every time I ran into him, he said, "Oh, that's that cat that plays them like out chords."
Well, he was probably deep down enjoying trying to find the connection on them, because
he still sounded great. I mean, from my recollection of it, which is pretty foggy now. I mean, 50 years later, but
Oh, well, just in case anyone who's just listened in, I just want to, just people listening in from over in Ireland and the UK as well as here in the States. And don't let this man give the impression he's going to sell himself short, because I have, first of all, what I've heard by reputation and what I've listened to of you, we're not going to allow you to sell yourself that short. There's the range of people that you have worked with demands a certain type of musician. It demands an adaptability, and you've already identified one side where you were not afraid to do homework. So you're the kind of musician who will learn somebody else's music. So that's a great relief to somebody who's going to bring you on board. They know that you can take care of that. But it's the wide range of styles and the people that. But what I want to do is, I suppose I should just read out what if somebody has something for you first. Now, from Limerick in Ireland, Chris de Verge is watching, and I hope you join us later on, Chris, right? You're going to jump in with us. John Daly, who's drummer from Limerick, southern western tip of Ireland, who plays vibes also. Says, can definitely relate to that, Bill. I did many shows without books. Oh, he was the theatre shows and then piano books. Greatly improved my ears and reading piano scores. Yeah, you also, sometimes in big bands, they just hand the drummer the lead trumpet part, which it just tells you some of the hits, but it doesn't tell you everything. And
yeah,
it doesn't tell you where the whole rhythm section are stopping and they want you to set it up. You have to be on your toes. But what I want to go straight to here is right to the top. And I think this is very interesting. We're in a time now where Ancestry.com and all these kind of places, you're able to trace lineage based on available DNA samples that are going around. You have an awareness of a very important detail in your family's musical history, and I'm just curious if it's come to you via the most, believe it or not, the most reliable source for most historians is the anecdotal within a family passing down. So what I'm referring to, what I'm referring to, but it says here, harkening back to an ancestral violinist whose freedom from slavery was bought in performance. That's. Can you tell me what you know about that? What your family would have, how that was handed down, and
it's handed down in the stories. It's just by word of mouth. Myself, my cousin James Ware, Dr. James Ware, my cousin Mary Brown, my sisters, Patricia Fitzgerald and Cynthia Agee, we've all been sort of looking into our genealogy.
Cynthia's listening in. I saw her name pop up.
Shout out, hey Susan. Yeah, we've done some. We've done. I did the ancestry, and we've done some research, and we've able. It's very hard to find any records and real information. Plus, as I've discussed with my cousin James, our family is very, for lack of a better word, secretive about intimate details of the family history. So we've just recently been discussing a lot of things, and we've decided to make a point of bringing out and talking about these details, because you assume that we know them all, but it turns out half the things we don't know at all. So my cousin and I, we started discussing a lot of things. We had a party, New Year's Eve, we got together and we were talking about things, and we said, well, we got to talk about this stuff more often because it doesn't come up. But most of that is just stories that was handed down by my dad, and he told us that we had a great uncle who played violin, who brought the family's freedom, and through playing the violin, which was one of the reasons why he was such an insistent on us learn. Wasn't what instrument or whether you're going to play music or not. It was what instrument. you had to play music. He just saw it as something family-wise that you had to do. You had to do something in the arts, preferably music, or fine art, music, fine art. Either one of those was fine, but you had to do one of those, and there was just no escaping that. I think that was even a higher priority than going to college, which was also a big priority. So going to school and playing music was a must, because he saw it. It was also something that in his youthful years kind of saved him in crazy racist America. He went through a lot of rough experiences, and when he got out of the army, he was filled with rage and hatred. And what saved him was a good buddy of his got him into playing music. And so, with the family lineage and all, he just saw that as a savior, something that would. And he was right. In many aspects, it's funny. I think I get that from him. Much of my musical people, oh, how did you know to do this? How did you do that? How did you do that? I'm like Mr. Magoo. I'm stumbling through life with my eyes half open, and I just happen to fall 9 times out of 10 in the right place at the right time. And I've just been, lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it. I've been blessed to find myself in the right situation. Sometimes I'll do something just out of sheer, a little voice in my head says, do this, try that, go here, do that. And okay. And I do it. And then I don't even know why I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm enjoying it. It seems like a cool thing to do. And then, 5 years, 10 years, 2 months later, or whatever, all of a sudden it turned out if I hadn't done that, this other opportunity over here wouldn't have opened up. So yours just happened. I think when you're either stupid enough, or lucky enough, or your karma is right, you stumble upon the right situations.
Or in your case, smart enough, because I've been talking to Chris DeBerge, and one of the things he said, I can see sometimes when I start to make some sports analogies with things to do with the physiology of playing music, I can see people dialing me out. And Chris said another thing you and Bill can talk about is he told me that you're into all this stuff as well. That the different you were was it baseball? He said, and exactly where.
Yeah, well, baseball at my latest, I didn't really actually like baseball as a kid. I went to a few games. When I was either 8 or 9, I went to a Yankee game. It was bat day. I got a Mickey Mantle bat, I remember. And I found a guy's wallet with $400 cash in it.
Wow, that was a lot of money then.
And that would have been 1967, maybe 1960. That was a lot of money. So I felt so proud that we turned it into the stadium security, and I thought he turned it in and gave my name. I thought, sure, maybe I'd get a reward or something, which I didn't, but I did get the gas money back to him. And then I also went to see the Mets play a couple of years later. I don't remember, 68 or 69, I don't remember. I went to see the Mets play, and it turned out to be the longest Met game in the history of the Mets. The game was 23 innings, I think. It started, it started at 1 o'clock, and we left out of there at 9 p.m. And I thought, that's it. I'm done with baseball. It's too long. It's just, I didn't know, it was one of the longest, I think it was the longest game in Met history and one of the longest baseball games in history. But again, I found a guy's wallet with $500 in it. I'm like, I'm the king of finding stuff, because I don't know, I just have a very good peripheral vision, and I kind of, as a kid, we played these games, the first one to see something, when we were sitting in a crowd and you're waiting for somebody to appear, you're supposed to meet somebody. The first one to see him wins, like, oh, there he is. I was
Right.
always the first one to see. And we played games too as a kid. Pick the commercial on television. The first one to name the commercial when it would come on, whatever the product was, would win. Just get a point, and then at the end you add up the points. So those were kind. But I think.
Please tell me that you got a reward on the second. On the
I
second
didn't get a
one.
reward. No reward. I turned it in again. No reward. And again, it happened to me years later in Japan. I found a wallet with the equivalent in yen of about $800. This was, which would have been 1990. But I turned in the wallet. Again, didn't get a reward. But it's just turning it in and knowing that, that's a lot of money for somebody. I mean, maybe, at that time, maybe the Japanese were, their economy was doing really well. Maybe it wasn't a whole lot of money, but $500 in the 60s was probably the guy's paycheck.
Oh, so, yeah.
You probably saved him from starving his family at that point. So that's a reward in and of itself. So but, I love sports. As a matter of fact, Chris Soley, I think you're a big boxing fan.
I am. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was really into boxing. Of course, Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion in those days, and I was a huge Muhammad Ali.
Me too. I was allowed to stay up to watch him with the hour difference.
Yeah,
as a young kid.
Basketball, I watched a lot of basketball. Of course, the Knicks in 1969. They won the championship that year, and so I was a big football, basketball, somewhat hockey, which was unusual for blacks at that time. Hockey, I loved hockey. Just it was so incredibly fast to see these guys. And I skated. We used to skate. I was terrible at it, but we had frozen pond near us, and every Wednesday I would go skating at the that South Mountain. I think it's called the South Mountain Arena. Every Wednesday, my mom would take us skating. You skate around in a circle, and I would spy all the cute girls, of course. That skating was part of my life, even though I was terrible at it, and I fell a lot of times. I was never very good. I could never figure out how to break.
If you're looking back at some girl, you're gonna fall pretty quickly.
I'm gonna fall, exactly. Yeah, that's probably why I fell half the time, but. I really liked hockey and but not so much baseball. But I really liked the boxing. And then once when Muhammad Ali started to fade and not become so popular, I didn't get it. I really liked Sugar Ray Leonard. I liked the finesse guys. And then I started to get into the martial. That led me to martial arts. And when I got into martial arts, we used to go to see a lot of karate movies, a lot of kung fu movies, and martial arts movies. You could go down. There was a theater near us that would have a double feature for $1.50, and we would go there. And my sister took me to the movies sometimes, and we would see some karate pictures. And then once I found Bruce Lee, that was it. He was the man. I kind of left boxing alone. I was like, they got nothing on these Chinese guys. Bruce Lee was like, forget about it. He was like superhuman. And I read his books and actually helped my music out, because a lot of I began to, as I got a little older into high school, I read the book, The Zen of Archery.
Oh, yeah.
I got this idea that you could probably learn a lot about philosophy and then apply the philosophies that you learn in other disciplines to music, because just studying music alone was not enough for me. Especially a lot of musicians didn't talk about philosophy, and a lot of the musicians of the music that I really liked, which is bebop, they weren't talking at all. They didn't want anybody to know their secrets. A lot of guys, especially, there was a lot of racism on both sides of the fence, and a lot of the black guys resented white guys coming into communities, stealing the secrets, and then taking them back to their community. And economically, that didn't translate to the African American community, and they resented that. So they weren't telling anybody anything. So if I really wanted to learn stuff, it wasn't, you weren't going to find it in books, and you weren't going to find it from a lot of musicians unless you were in with the in crowd. And half the time, being a kid from Jersey living in the white suburbs, I wasn't in with the in crowd. So the only way that I could get what I needed to get was to adopt philosophies from other disciplines, which is what I did. And I read Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do book, and I read the Zen of Archery, and I read a lot of philosophy by Indian philosophers, Krishnamurti, and Erich Fromm, To Have, To Be. And I applied those philosophies to how I approached music, which really opened up my ability to see how, okay, like for instance, Bruce Lee, his whole philosophy, he studied Kung Fu and he studied Wing Chun, but he took that and expanded it by looking at all the other disciplines and taking what he needed, because he realized one discipline is not going to have everything you need. And I kind of use that approach with music. One style of music is not going to give you everything you want. So you may sound great and you may be an expert in that style, but as a well-rounded musician, you're not going to be well-rounded unless you study, get things from other styles. So I took things from classical music. I took things from Latin music. I took things from African music. I took things from Indian music. I tried to really learn Moroccan music, anything that I could get my hands on that was interesting to me. I tried to at least get to the essence of what made it what it was, and try and learn some things from those styles of music. And it opened up my mind to be able to understand and
I'm going to read out the wide range of people just in the first paragraph, and this is before we get into this, but just to give people an example of, now we understand how you would have approached these different styles because of an attitude like that, and informed by the kind of mind you had where you're exploring outside of the music and drawing influences. I identify with a lot of that too, because I kind of live in analogies. I think most of the time I relate something to something else all the time. But straight off the bat, vibraphonist, composer, bassist, pianist, educator, and here's the wording here, which is great: a creative adventurer. Now, I want to go straight to founding member of the Jazz Passengers. Tell you a funny story about your band when you played at Jazz Standard many years ago when they first opened, and Groove Collective. Now, we had Groove Collective on here, and your name, Jay Rodriguez and Chris and everybody, they kept bringing your name up, and that we got to get you. And also collaborated with Steely Dan. Now, there's few of my friends in Ireland would have been Dana saying play some tunes. Don't worry, Dana, we're going to play some tunes. We're just we're opening the lid right now. Steely Dan, John Zorn, J.D. Parran, Mark Rebo, Bobby Sanabria, Deborah Harry, the BBC Concert Orchestra, Chico Mendoza, Mickey Bass, I know Mickey from years back, Bobby Previtt, Joe Henderson, Jerome Harris, the Buffalo Philharmonic, the Minnesota Symphony, Elvis Costello, Arturo O'Farrell, Andy Summers, Marshall Crenshaw, Pink Floyd's David Gilmour, and many more. You have to say Pink Floyd's David Gilmour over here, because there's another David Gilmour, right? The other guitar player on the scene, great guitar player.
Yeah, that David Gilmour.
That David Gilmour, yeah. So let's play. Do you want me to play the one with snow on the title? That is it?
Yeah, you could play that. I mean, I enjoy all of it, but my manager probably, she's in control of everything. She's my brains these days, so she's like, make sure he plays some of the Ahmed movie, and make sure he plays some of the new things like Snowbound. And
I have to tell you, Dana, I know you're listening in. This man has done so much stuff that we nearly need to do a mini series to get through everything. But we're going to try and feature, because I had some fun earlier on looking at the wide range of stuff that So let's go to Snowbound. That's what she said. That's the one.
Yeah,
So I'm just looking for the link on that I had earlier on.
this guy behind me.
Where's, so I'm going to your page now, and we'll get to.
Yeah, you got to dig it out of the videos.
She did send me the link, but of course it's. Oh, here we go. I see it now. All right, so we're going to. I always make a joke about how I'm going to have to fire my staff here, the technical staff. It's all me doing it, but I have to do the
I
shares.
know the feeling, like I'm gonna have to fire my producer, my engineer. Oh wait, isn't it?
So here comes Snowbound, and yeah, it's taking a second to load.
10 seconds it's like Christmas Day. Then it's dark again. Oh, then it's dark again. Slow down, let's sleep in today. Wake me up when the wolves come out to play. Eat up, keep up nights. Gonna turn this town into a city of lights. Slow down, let's sleep in today. Wake me up when the wolves come out to play. Eat up, keep up nights. Gonna turn this town into a city of lights.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we should read out a few. There's some questions coming for you, and there's a lot of people loving it.
Okay.
But Mike Callahan, who I don't think he's missed a show here since we started doing this, and I met him at Tommy Flanagan's gigs and Cedar Walton's gigs. Mike is the tender young age of 80, and his response, I loved it when he came out. Ooh, love it. And Neil Maharg, is that somebody you know? Because he seemed to know you.
Yeah.
Because he typed in "be where," and I thought, oh, great that he has a ton of that. So he wants to know, when will Bill's new one be released?
That's a good question. My manager, as she would tell you, she thinks I'm
Dana, that's a question for you to type in.
I'm stingy with my music because I have about, I don't know. I've lost track of how many projects that I have that aren't released. I have at least 12 CDs worth of music that has not been released. So I just do things because they're fun, and I try and keep my art and the business side completely separated, so one doesn't really influence the other for me. I mean, maybe to my detriment. that's not a good thing. But for the art's sake, I think it's for me it's important because I don't know. The money thing just it messes my head. So I guess that's why I have a manager. Because I really don't care about the money. I just care about the music. And I always tell people I only know 12 things: C sharp, D, E flat, E, etc. That's all I know. And so that's what I do. But so I have no idea. Probably
I'll tell you, Bill, you
because
know how to make a very joyful sound with those 12 things, because that's
probably soon, because that's the project that I'm spending a lot of time putting together now is this idea of playing a small band and doing sort of timba, jazz, funk crossover music, but kind of music for dance. but focused on Afro-Cuban rhythms, and that's one of the tunes. Snowbound, written by Donald Fagen. That's one of the tunes that I'm doing. I have it's a weird eclectic blends of stuff. I have some original Afro-Cuban music written by a composer from New Jersey, Carlos Quique Cruz. I've been collaborating with him since the early 1980s on music. We had a salsa band back in the day, and he's responsible for bringing me kind of into that genre. A buddy of mine, went to high school with. Neil Maharg is a guy I know from Columbia High School in Maplewood, and we played football together. We called it rough. We played rough football. It was tackle football, but no equipment. You couldn't use any equipment. You were allowed to use light pads, and that was it. And it was rough. And we played, in the yard, schoolyards, and like each team, you knew guys by the grammar school. They was Clinton school guys, Marshall school guys, and that's how you usually played one school against another. And I was fortunate enough to play on Neil's team one time, even though I'm not sure which school he was from, but there weren't enough guys from one school, and so we put a bunch of guys together from different schools, and maybe Montrose, I don't remember. But
so you're getting some you're getting some people here that clearly know you from a long time back. Dana did answer the question on the next project is probably a recording of Ahmed. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, Ahmed. The movie, the Adventures of Ahmed. It's a
I looked at that today.
Very famous film. Recently, it's been awarded the top 15 animated films of all time. It's been in the top 10 and in the top 15 of several very distinguished lists. So it's a really well-known film and beautiful film by Charlotte Lotte Reiniger from Germany, from 1926, and I've done a film score with that, and my small band features Steve Bernstein on trumpet, slide trumpet, and Philip Mayer from the band's Visit, and John Murchison, who plays the djembe, which is the Moroccan, it's a bass lute, and myself on vibes. And people have described it as sort of Miles meets Moroccan music. It's got quite a unique.
We're gonna play a little bit of it actually, and it's the trailer that you have. We'll play that in just a couple of minutes, but I want to just get to, there's some people who I think know you a long time are saying hi. So Thomas McKay said aloha, Billy Ware.
Yeah, a vibraphone is from Hawaii.
And Cynthia said, "Do what you love," in response to the. Thomas is also saying aloha to Dana, and so we got Jerry Weldon watching, the saxophone player. You might know Jerry. Great old shandos, they call it in Ireland, the traditional Irish singing. Derval and Rollacon's listening in. Danny Dreher, who is rhythm guitarist for a lot of blues bands and through the years, and he's enjoying the show. And Cassandra Wilson has just joined us now, so wow. we got quite a few people listening. So what I want to there's so much stuff that you've done that I almost feel that I need to set the tone for. We're probably going to have to come back at another date, and so that would take the pressure off both of us to cover everything in one day. I'm telling you, everyone out here, you want to see what music this man has made, but we're gonna attempt to get as much of it done. But jumping out of me here. Before we play Ahmed, which I jump all over the place, this is the way I do this.
But that fits my mind.
After recuperation from a bout of serious illness in 1982, Bill began working in and writing for Latin jazz bands as a bassist or pianist, including that of Bobby Sanabria. So, just wondering, what was the illness and how debilitating was it for you at that time?
Well, when I was a kid, I think I was 2, I got pneumonia. And so I was quite frail. And from that point on, I was very susceptible to pneumonia. So I got it again really badly. I was really sick when I was, I think maybe it's 11 years old or 12. I got really sick again. And I was really sick. I remember this awful medicine that I had to take. Talk about memory things. I took a couple things I'll never forget. That awful medicine that I had to take that ended up, I was either allergic to it or something. It made me even sicker. And my sister bought me a 45. My sister Patricia Fitzgerald bought me a 45 James Brown, Get Up, Get On Up, Get Into It. And I played that record over and over and over again, 6 hours a day, probably for days. Drove my family crazy, I'm sure. But I loved that record. I would just play that over and over and over again. But and then again in 1982, I was in my senior year of college. I was paying part of my college playing music on the street, and I was playing music, just vibes and drums duo. My first drummer that I played with was a guy who goes by the name of Ala Asa now. He, at the time, his name was Wayne Byers. And he got this idea, said, yeah, man, he was always coming to me. I always had somebody in my life bringing things to me because I'm the kind of guy who sits at home and just studies and plays music in my own world. And then I always seem to have friends who go out into the world and find stuff, and they get me involved. So one of the things was playing music on the street. One of the many things that he brought to me was playing music on the street. So let's go play music on the street. People got to hear you. You got to come out of the house. So I said, all right. So we would play music on the street. Then the second drummer that I played music on the street was Vince Cherigo. At the time, another guy who changed his name. Speaking of coincidence, he was known, then his real name was Vince Schmelzkopf, but he got into the Latin scene, partially through me. He got into the Latin world from this great Cuban drummer that I stumbled upon. It's another long story, but to make it short, Roberto Borrell, fantastic drummer. He was the director of the Cuban National Ballet, and he was one of the first Marielitos to come over. And I ended up playing with him and introduced him to Vince. So Vince Cherigo was the second drummer. And then the third drummer that I played with was this crazed lunatic named Bobby Bass. And this guy was like a phenom. He was sort of a Buddy Rich clone. And he had this crazy Rototom drum kit. And we would go out and play on the street. And he was really an interesting character, let me put it that way. And he believed in demons and all kinds of weird stuff. And he said, we got the people don't want to hear ballads, Billy. They don't want ballads. They just want to hear the tempos. They want to hear the tempos. So we played nothing below 240. You know, everything was 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I would play for as long as I could hang in there on my chops for about 7 minutes, maybe max, you know. And then he would take a 20-minute drum solo, which was exact same solos that Buddy Rich would do. He had all the techniques down, the thing, and it was like a drum symphony. And it had this form, and it was almost always the same. It was like a little routine that he would go to. It wasn't the most musical thing, but people couldn't get money out of their pockets fast enough. Yeah. we would play, and then that would be our routine. We'd do that. He'd do the solo. I'd go around, pass a hat, and then we would stop for a little while, let that crowd go away, and get another crowd, and do the same thing over and over again. So we do that all day long. So I was out in the street. We would head out about 10 o'clock, hit the streets at 11 in time to get the lunch crowd. And then we would be out there until 3 or 4, sometimes 5 on the weekends. So weekends we would move from Midtown to downtown and play in Washington Square Park. So sometimes we'd be out there 7, 8 hours a day. And the streets are filthy dirty, and breathing in all of that dirt all day long and the bad air and all the germs and everything. And he would always tell me, Billy, you gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. Don't touch things. The demons will get in you. And he swore that the demons got in me. That's why I got sick, because I didn't heed his advice. I think it was just, we also played at that time in the late 70s, early 80s, the temperature was warm for about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years. It was starting to get really warm in the winters, and it would start to get warm in April, and it would stay warm sometimes till February. You know, and we would go out and play if it was above 40 degrees. So I was out in the cold, sweating, and
okay,
and
so that wouldn't have been.
I got pneumonia. The pneumonia was complicated with pleurisy, and then the pleurisy was complicated by an acid-fast bacteria, which is tuberculosis is one acid-fast bacteria. I didn't have tuberculosis, but it was very similar to that. So I was. Well, really
it's interesting because Dana read my mind a few minutes back when I went there. Like she said, this is why she has you locked down, literally in a lock and key, because with the COVID situation.
Yeah, you won't let me leave the house. I don't leave the property except for very few instances, and then I have my mask on, and I was really sick. And they said we could give you antibiotics and you could go into a sanatorium, and we don't know how long that would take. Or you could have the operation and we'll cut the bacteria out, and we can give you a definite time about how long it would take to rehabilitate. And they estimated that if I had the operation that February, I could probably work again by September. So that's what I did. I opted for the operation. They cut out 1/3 of my right lung, and by August, I forget, August 23rd maybe, I did my first gig again. So
your lungs regenerate, don't they? Isn't that something that have
No, the lungs don't regenerate.
No? Okay.
You adapt, because you only use most of the time, unless you're, I mean, even some of the, Mark Spitz, I think only had one lung. Wow,
the great.
So you really only use a certain 1/3 of your capacity most of the time. The only time, if you're in extreme sports, then you'll use a large amount, but you don't really use a lot of your lung capacity. So, and then your body adapts to the condition. So it wasn't that bad, but I was unable to play music from February until that August, but I made the best of it, because at that time I was playing basically 2 mallets. I picked up a 3rd mallet so that when I played on the street with just drums, I would have at least 2 notes to accompany while I played melodies with the right hand. Because like I said, everything was up tempo. Even when we played a ballad like, what's the tune? Was that Easy Living?
Easy Living, yeah.
Living, right? We play Easy Living, and we would play it like this. Anything, ballads, all the ballads, we just play double time, triple time to make them. So I had to play the melodies with the right hand, down, so to have some accompaniment with me. So it wasn't just, really bare melody and drums on the bottom. I adapted and started playing with 2 mallets in one hand. And I thought that was pretty cool. It was kind of like 2 mallets augmented. And then at that time I was going to Jazzmobile. And when Jay Hogard, who was a great vibraphone player.
Right, Jay, yeah.
He was one of my teachers there. When he saw that, he just shook his head like, what are you doing? I said, I'm playing 3 mallets. It's my style. He said, that's not a style. That's not a style. That's nothing. He said, play with 4 or play with 2, but 3 is just ridiculous. And I felt really bad. I was a teenager and full of pride and ego and I thought.
But you must have been coming up with things of your own,
right? But I was hard-headed. But when I got sick, it gave me an opportunity because nobody wants to sound bad, and when you're trying something new, there's that period where you don't really sound that good until you have it down. And this gave me an opportunity to work on my 4 mallet playing, and without doing gigs. So I made a vibraphone out of cloth, and I would sit in bed and read books or watch TV, and I could just work on my 4 mallet technique on the bed. And then by the time I did a gig again in August, I had enough chops to actually go on the gig, play with 4 mallets, and not sound bad.
So you were visualizing the sound internally. That's an interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't so much. I didn't really care about the sound. I just wanted to have the technique, the hand strength, and the dexterity. And also at that time, I realized that it was very difficult to play. Recently, I just joined this club, Vibraphone. It's another Facebook group called Vibraphone. Somebody invited me. I think it was Thomas McKay invited me to be in Vibraphone. And today a guy was talking about how he plays with 4 mallets and he can only play on the edge of the bar with certain voicings. And to avoid that problem, I noticed that when I was learning on this little thing, because I had no sound. So I was trained to hit in the center of the bar. And I realized that with all 4 mallets extended all the time, first of all, it was very taxing on the arms. And I couldn't get to the center of the bar with certain voicings of the 4 mallet,
right.
Of using all 4 mallets. I couldn't get to the center with all the mallets extended. So I also taught myself how to manipulate the length of the stick while playing at the same time. So I developed a technique, which I'm probably the only one that uses it. I called it I called it a catch grip. And I by hitting the mallets against my chest or my hips or my chest, I could extend the mallets, and then by moving my hands this way, I could release them and catch them in midair. And then, so I worked on that catch grip so that I could extend them, use the inner 2 and have more power and retract the outer 2 when I didn't need them, and then quickly snap them back into place. And I worked on that as a technique. I kind of got the idea of something I read about that Bruce Lee had talked about, distances and power, and Kung Fu, Wing Chun, it's very much about getting the exact angle to get the right power for what you need. So I utilized that philosophy in developing this hand, and this gave me a chance to work on it. I'd
say there's a lot of vibes players listening in that are very interested in that right now. What I want to do is play some sounds for people, and then there'll be questions, I'm sure, about what you just talked about waiting on us. So I thought about this would be a good time to play the. You would know how long it is. There was that short film of the Adventures of Prince Ahmed. So what I could do is I can play the whole thing now, and I'm not a big fan of stopping things. I feel it messes with my own OCD, I suppose. But
stopping a song in the middle.
There's is there a song in the middle on this video clip? Is there?
No. I was just saying, like, stopping.
Oh yeah, stopping a song in the middle. Yeah, I don't like to do that if I can, I don't ever want to disrespect somebody's music, but sometimes if
Yeah.
Well,
Sometimes,
Dana's saying it's only 5 minutes. Okay, so
yeah.
I thought it was
The
15.
trailer's no, the trailer's very short. It's a little 5 minute.
Okay, because I looked at this today, and I'm from 1926. It's fascinating what you explain it better in this. So let me just open the link, and we'll get this ready to go now. But this is great stuff, Bill. Thank you for coming on and talking about this stuff.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
There's,
Hi, I'm Bill Ware, and I made this trailer to show you my live music setting to The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. This beautiful 1926 silent film by Charlotte Lotte Reiniger features her silhouette animation technique using manipulated cardboard cutouts and thin sheets of lead under a camera. Distributed by Milestone Films, this 65-minute fairy tale is based on the timeless stories of 1001 Arabian Nights. It takes audiences to a magical land with an African sorcerer, an Arabian prince, beautiful princesses, giant snakes and bats, Aladdin and his magical lamp, and plenty of mystery. My original score is built upon the haunting pulse of the djembe, also known as the sintir, a three-string, skin-covered bass lute played by the Ganawa people of northern Africa. Middle Eastern percussion instruments and jazz vibraphone create a unique and captivating groove, with violin and slide trumpet completing the ensemble to explore melodic motifs that match the various characters in the film. I hope you'll enjoy this short demonstration and would love to perform my score live with my band for your venue's projection of The Adventures of Prince Ahmed.
Yeah.
That's just amazing. Wow. There's 1926, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I can only imagine the because that animation stuff, you know, they have to film one little click, one little thing at a time, and then move this, and then wow, it's very labor intensive, very labor intensive.
Was this a very exciting project for you to get your hands on to score this and to?
Yeah. Again, the Milestone Films is owned by a couple of very good friends of my wife's, and you know, when she suggested this, or I did a bunch of film scoring in the early 2000s. I scored John Leguizamo's first directorial debut, directorial debut, a film for HBO called Undefeated. I was with along with my partner from the Jazz Passengers, Roy Nathanson. We had a little film scoring company that we dabbled in the 2000s, and we did, I don't know, 6, 7 films, and I did some other films on my own, and I really enjoyed that work. It's kind of hard work to get, but I really enjoyed putting music to film. And unlike a lot of musicians, you know, they score something and you know, they don't, you know, they do it once, so they don't. But in the film world, I don't know. Especially when the director is maybe not so strong a director or not so well known, or like John was his first. So you got a lot of voices, and there's a lot of people. There's a big committee when you're making a film. A lot of producers, and the more money they put in, the more control they. You know, it's very chaotic and odd world to exist in, and musicians, especially, you know, creative, you used to just doing your thing and not having like a zillion people telling you this and that. But so in that world, it was very odd, and so they would come back. Oh, this is nice, but you know, can you be like this, or can you shorten it, or can you get? We really like this, but you know, maybe can you give us like 2 or 3 more examples? And my partner would be like, he's ready to pull his hair out. But I would go, oh, they want me to do 4 more? Okay, you want 10? I give you 10. Yeah, no, that's too many choices, you know. But I love to do something, do it once, do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So I always thought I was kind of suited to that world. But so when this opportunity came along, even there's not a committee of people making suggestions, but just my manager and we sent it around to a lot of people. But it seemed like I was hitting the ball well on the first try. So a lot of everything that I wanted to do seemed to work out kind of cool with this film. So
Well, it
So yeah,
sounds
I'm excited to hopefully the COVID-19 kind of brought the whole project to its knees or to a halt or temporarily anyway. So we'll see, what happens. But I'm looking forward to doing that and to finishing that. That's a demo recording that we put together. We kind of threw that together just to have something to go with the trailer. So I'm really looking forward to finishing that. And I have a beautiful studio. We moved to New York State a year ago. I guess it'll be a year in July we've been here. And I have a beautiful studio now. And so that's part of the reason why the virus hasn't really affected me. That's because I don't want to leave my studio anyways. I have a beautiful studio for the first time in my career. That's just a wonderful atmosphere to work in, and so I'm looking forward to finishing the recording for that and finishing out the entire movie, and just recording stuff in here, like the Snowbound I recorded here. I'm playing all the instruments, and so I'm fortunate enough to be able to at least muck my way through piano and bass and do drums and record all the stuff myself. So fortunate enough to be a one-man band here because it's with that
sounded great with all the percussion and your knowledge of the different genres too, and the different makes you very flexible. I will be shot if I don't ask you about this, some of the people that you worked with. So if we could maybe hit on a few of those.
Sure.
Obviously, the Steely Dan connection comes up with a lot of people here. So you toured with them when they returned to touring after not having done any for years, right? You were in their first returning tour?
That's another one of them. I'm Mr. Magoo, things. I mean, there are guys that are they seem to play with all the top projects, and they're just on the scene, and they meet all the right people at all in the right times. I don't meet anybody, so I've always had somebody in my life, like I said, early in my early years in high school. Mike Kaplan, a tenor saxophone player I went to school with, he connected me with the salsa scene, and through the salsa scene, I got a call one day from the band leader. I was playing in this band called Butch Johnson and his 11-piece Latin Jazz Ensemble. That was actually the name of the band.
Right.
As you can tell by the title, it was not a big sell. But we were together for quite a number of years, and he would always get these steady gigs. We would play like every Wednesday or every Thursday, salsa night at some club somewhere. And one day I get a call from the band leader. He says, "Oh, I got this kid who wants to sit in with us," because we would encourage any musicians to come and sit in with us. That was part of the whole deal was, let people sit in and make it some pseudo jam session kind of thing. So in the Latin jazz vein. So he said, "Oh, I got this kid he wants to play with," and this gig was 5 minutes from my house. So I was not very happy to have to drive all the way to Union City to pick up some kid. So I was in a gruff. "Oh man, you kidding me?" Anyways, as usual, I stumbled upon something really good. Anyways, I went to pick up this kid who was, I think he was 14 or 15, and it was Jay Rodriguez, his tenor saxophone player, saxophone player. Anyways, I picked him up at his home and I drove him to the gig. Anyways, it developed into a now 40 plus year friendship. And Jay is one of these kind of guys. He's a wonderful personality, a really warm human being. And he knows everybody. And one of these guys knows everybody, has all kinds of connections. And he was my guy for years. And he would any project that he always called me, "Oh, Bill, I got this thing. Oh, I met this person. Oh, you gotta introduce you to him." He was always any connection. He's just open like that. Any connections that he made, he always wanted to expose me or get me involved. And so, anyways, make a long story short, the years went by. He called me out one day. He said, "Oh, we were almost roommates for a minute, but he got me to move to New York. You got to move to the city. Somebody like you can't be in New Jersey. No one's going to ever find you there." So you got to move to the city. So all right. So he got a place for us. You know, I split up with my girlfriend at the time, and so the timing was right. And then I started dating a woman in New York, and I was hardly ever in New Jersey, so it made sense for me. And I got into the Jazz Passengers through another high school buddy of mine. That was fortuitous thing. That's a whole nother story. I won't get into that. But anyway, so Jay, I was supposed to move in with Jay, and then at the last minute, he decided to move in with his girlfriend, but he got me the place anyway. So I moved into this loft, and I was in the Jazz Passengers. And so then we went to Japan together, Jay and I. I recommended, I got him on that gig to go to Japan with some great players and some not so known players. And we went to Japan for 3 months. And when we came back, Jay started jamming with in this new budding scene called Giant Step, run by these two guys from one was from England, or maybe one was South African, I believe, and one was from England, Maurice Bernstein, and Giant Step, and Jonathan Rednick. So when I came back from Japan, I called my band after the club which ended up getting raided by police and closed down. The club was called Club Bird, so that became my moniker, Club Bird. I like that whole idea of being in some kind of club that was dedicated to Charlie Parker.
Right.
And Eddie Bebopper's hero. And so I took that moniker and I called my band the Club Bird Jazz All Stars, stolen from this club. So I had a band and we were playing upstairs, and Giant Step was downstairs at the Metropolis Cafe in downtown. Where's that? It's near
that was near Union Square.
Union
right?
Square, yeah, Union Square. So in the break, my musicians, Josh Roseman, trombone player, Fabio Morgera on trumpet, Jay Rodriguez on tenor saxophone, they would disappear in the breaks. We were playing upstairs, and if we had 30 people in the audience, it was packed. That was packed. It was a little supper club, and the piano player got the gig. It was actually the piano player, Barney McCall. It was.
Oh, I know Barney. Yeah.
It was his gig.
Yeah.
He got the gig, but they wanted a band. He didn't have a band, so I had to lay off my piano player, Matt King, because this guy who was the piano player had the gig. So I brought the band, and he was the piano player now because it was his gig.
Right.
So he had the gig, and I had the piano player. He was a piano player, and the horn players, because they had their horns and they could just go wherever they wanted, they started going down and jamming with the Giant Step scene, which was basically a DJ and live musicians jamming together. That was what the scene was. And they had a line around the block, and the place had 500 to 800 people and was packed and full of gorgeous women. So my young horn players were all over that.
Right.
And so anyways, that eventually became a band. The main guys, Genji Sarasi on the drummer and Jonathan Marin, the bass player, they were the main guys in this Giant Step scene. And there was also a flute player, Richard Worth. And they were like, and the percussionist, Gordon Nappy G, was on percussion. So they were the main guys, and they were part of another band called Raw Stylus, I think was Repercussions. They were part of a band called, there were two bands. There was a Raw Stylus and Repercussions. And they were kind of all in the Giant Step stable. They were being managed by the two guys from Giant Step, Maurice Bernstein and Jonathan Rednick. So they wanted to do something that was a little more jam oriented, because Repercussions and Raw Stylus were very strict format, sort of pop funk bands. And they wanted to do something that wasn't so controlled. So they typical musician scene, we don't like those guys, so let's like start another band without them, and we'll call it something else. But it's basically like the same guys minus the guys that they didn't particularly care for. And they started it. So they started a thing. Anyway, so my horn players joined in that band, and then that band blew up from, I don't know, maybe it was 4 or 5 guys, and then they added the horn players. Now it's like 8 guys, and they add another guy, and it's 9 guys. And I was one of the last guys to join the thing, because the vibraphone is not something that you can just drag around and sit in. So I said, well, if I'm going to play, and I was the oldest guy in the scene, and so if I'm going to play, I want to play, it's got to be a real gig. I'm not just going to drag the vibe somewhere and sit in. So,
Right.
so they got me, they had a gig at, I think the club was called Nell's. And that was, I think, that one of the first gigs. And then we also played at this place in Soho called Sybarite, which is like one of these crazy loft kind of gigs. We had these weird loft gigs and all kinds of strange, because there was really no, it was a big band, and there wasn't really a scene for that music yet. So that was the early. Anyways, Gary Katz, to shorten a very long story somewhat. Gary Katz, who produced all the early Steely Dan records, was heard about the scene, and he offered a record deal to Repercussions, and I'm not sure Raw Stylist might have been on the record deal, and Groove Collective. So that's how I met Gary Katz. And through Gary Katz, there was no band leader in Groove Collective. So there was a lot of determining anything with that band was like Congress. There were all kinds of factions and little cliques within the band, and some guys want to do this and some guys want to do that. And so it was all of this turmoil. It was very tumultuous trying to get anything done. So I think Gary Katz thought, you know what? Maybe if I get a couple of these guys a Steely Dan gig, we can get them out of there, and I can produce this band the way I want to. That was my spin on it. I don't even know if that was actually true or not. But so Jay was almost got the gig. He was recommended on saxophone, and he recommended me. And next thing I knew, I thought, these guys aren't going to. I mean, Peter Erskine, Tom Barney, Bob Shepard, Warren Bernhardt from Steps Ahead. I mean, these are like, A-list guys. And Bill Ware, who plays with the Jazz Passengers from East Village. Yeah, that's going to happen. I thought, this is no way.
No, Bill Ware, A-list guy. Right?
So, well, this is my mind anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's...
Anyway,
a very endearing quality.
They heard the Clubbird All-Stars CD, and they hired me. So much to my amazement, and what a fantastic gig it was. I got this guy behind me with my blow up of my Fishing Buddies T-shirt, but it turned out to be quite a fantastic experience. And yeah, I toured with him 93, 94, and 95. 3 fantastic years touring with just an unbelievable.
There was a lot of excitement about them coming back touring, wasn't there? Because they had really...
it was the tour of the summer. When that 93, it was the gig to have in 1993, and everybody was talking about that band, and so many stories. I have so many stories from that. Those stories I'll never forget. I don't remember most of the gigs. I don't remember playing what I played in most of the gigs, except some of Walter Becker's sardonic comments on my playing. He would almost always introduce me with some commentary about my playing.
Can you remember any of them?
Yeah, I remember the main one. I put up as a Facebook story, but we were playing at one gig, and he introduced me. He said, Bill Ware on vibraphone, who he starts from the outside and works his way in. because I knew exactly what he was talking about because I was a featured soloist on a song called "Sign In Stranger," and I thought, oh, I wasn't really so much of a lyric guys ever before Steely Dan. You can't be in Steely Dan and not be into the lyrics of songs. So actually, being in Steely Dan kind of got me more hip to poetry and lyrics and the writing. And so I was really thinking about. I started to really think about what how the notes could have, how my solos could have some kind of relationship to these really incredible, meaningful lyrics. So I thought, oh, Sign In Stranger. So I would always start my Sign In Stranger solo with the note as far from the center of the harmony as I could get. So they were playing, the song is kind of based around this whole, Donald always starts every song he writes as a blues, at least mentally. Everything is a blues, and then he works his way out from there. So I kind of used that concept, and I thought, well, Sign In Stranger. What's the farthest that? So the song is like this C sharp 9 riff. It's so it's kind of based around this whole C sharp. I know, like all Steely Dan songs, a million chords, but the main thing is this C sharp to C riff. So I was like, okay, C, I'm gonna start my solo out with a C sharp. I'm just gonna lay on the out thing, and so then I superimpose an A7 over the C7, and I would always start out my solo on that. So that's what he was referring to, me starting out and then working my way back in.
Right.
So that one out, and in Seattle one time we were playing a gig, and I was hanging out with my cousin David Wilkins, who might be listening because he's one of my biggest fans. He's from Seattle, and I was hanging out with him at the concert, and he was thrilled. So we don't get to see each other that much because he's all the way in the West Coast. And he's from East Orange, New Jersey, and we used to see each other all the time because then he was 8 miles away. But now he's all the way in the West Coast. So he was thrilled to see me, and we were hanging out, and I didn't have really that much time to get ready for the gig. Usually there's a ton of time, between catering and the sound check, and then you were hanging out for hours. There's all this time, but I didn't have all that much time because I was hanging out with my cousin. So anyways, I get back to the dressing room, and it was super hot that day, and you play at the Gorge in George, Washington, which is a beautiful venue. And you play, when you're playing, you have the concert right at sunset. And you have the sun setting into the gorge behind you. It's just a beautiful venue. So anyway, but it was really hot that day and really humid. And I realized that what I had planned to wear was not that much different from the underwear that I had on. At the time, my standard operating procedure was a vest and no shirt. Just a vest, no shirt, and then what other pants I had on. Sometimes I also wore skirts. I was wearing maxi skirts at that time. Maxi skirt, a denim maxi skirt, jean denim maxi skirt, and cowboy boots and a vest. So I wore all these crazy outfits, right? So I'm looking at my outfits and deciding what to wear, and I realized it's so freaking hot out. And I just sometimes I like to push the envelope with the because I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to have a gig like this, for very long, first of all, and maybe never again like this in my life. So I pushed the envelope in terms of enjoyment of the gig. So I decided, you know what? I had this little vest T-shirt that I was wearing anyways, and I had on boxer shorts. And I looked at my outfit and I'm like, there's not that much. You know what? I'm going to go on stage in my underwear. And thinking no one's going to know. I'm standing behind the vibes. Hardly anybody sees me anyways. So I'm thinking, I'm all incognito. Nobody's going to even notice, right? Just as a goof, I did.
Right now, there's people searching YouTube for Steely Dan 93 to 95.
And Mr. doesn't miss one damn trick. But you don't never know it. Walter Becker, he announces me as, and on percussion from New York City, our very own scantily clad Bill Ware. I was like, oops, somebody noticed.
So today, I Tuesdays I always have to wrap up around 5:45 because my youngest son has something going on. So we will play out a piece of music on the way out, but this is probably not fair of me to do this, to pull these names out, but just with the people that would know you from the Jazz Passengers, I think it's fascinating the kind of vocalist. I remember hearing about this at the time. This was long before I ever met Curtis. I only met Curtis a couple of years ago with Cassandra, as I said. But the vocalists, first of all, the band, in addition to saxophonist Roy Nathanson and Curtis, who I'm talking about, the band also featured Mark Ribot. And it's the vocalists that started to collaborate with you. Mavis Staples, who I'm a huge fan of, Elvis Costello, Jimmy Scott, Cuba Gooding, Bob DeRoe, and of course Deborah Harry. Now, when you guys were playing at the Jazz Standard with Deborah Harry, I remember the hostess at the time was maybe a 20-year-old, and she goes, "Is this person famous? Because there's a lot of people phoning." And I remember one of the managers going, "Okay, can you come with me for a minute?" And he said, "Blondie, you've never heard of Blondie?" And it's that thing that happened to a generation that, of course, they had revival and everybody. But I remember thinking that, wow, that's for her to want to do a project with a band like you guys showed what an artist she was. You know, she would have any number of people who would want to get her out just doing any pop thing that she's going. So, is there anything in a couple of minutes that you could share about that, or do you want to put this on ice until?
So many things and so many stories. I mean, Debbie, just a fantastic human being. My favorite Debbie story is, I mean, you know, you meet a lot of celebrities, and some of them are jerks, and some of them are really wonderful people. I mean, you know, I've worked with a whole lot of people, and some of them are awful, and a lot of them are really great. And it was surprising how wonderful some of the people are. Elvis, Sting, really great people to work with, just amazing human beings. But Debbie, one of my favorite stories is really quite trying to do it quickly. We did a rehearsal with her in a little tiny rehearsal studio. After the rehearsal, she knew, you know, we were all East Village guys, you know, not making a lot of money. And she said, and I was using guys to cart my stuff around. And she said, well, you know, why don't I bring the Vibes to the gig to you? It'll save you the cartage. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. That saves me quite a bit of money, you know. So, and she had this pink Bonneville. And so we put the Vibes in the trunk of her car, and she said, "I'll meet you at the gig, and you can just and that way they'll get carted to the gig." I said, "Oh, great, fantastic!" So she carts the Vibes to the gig. Now I got there. I was biking to my gigs at that time, so I get there like 5-10 minutes late, and I'm thinking, "Oh, darn it, I missed her." Now I'm going to have to go to the parking lot, get the Vibes, and schlep them. And so I go into the club. We were playing at SOB's and on Varick, right?
Right.
So I go into the club, you know, to find Debbie and find out what parking lot she was at. And I look up, the Vibes are not only in the club, they're on the stage and set up.
No way.
So she brought the Vibes in and set them up, which, I mean, the Vibes is not an easy instrument to set up.
I wouldn't know how to start to set up a...
But that's the kind of person she is. She's incredibly warm and down to earth, and just, you know.
Well, I'm going to touch base with Dana and Chris and just see, you know, with dates. We got to get you back to, you know, it's. I love the detail with which, contrary to what you started it, the detail with which you remember things, because that feeds me the way I am too. Okay. Same. So if you're willing to come back for a second shot at this, we'll go further in.
Anytime.
But what would you like me to play? Anything in particular on the way out from? Because thankfully, Dana gave us plenty to work with.
What do you think?
There's a Celia Cruz, or there's
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The Guaracha del Mundo, because I'm making an attempt to sing in Spanish there, which is hilarious.
it's more than an attempt. I was going to ask you earlier on, was that you? And Chris is just saying, awesome show, guys. Thank you, Chris, for connecting us. And the beauty of usually, this is the only day where I actually have to be somewhere. Tuesdays are usually the day, but any other day, like we have a loose 6 o'clock kind of thing to cut off. We've gone way over at times. If it's kind of like if we're on a roll, we do it. So I'll make sure not to schedule us for a Tuesday, so that if we go into what Bill Maher would call overtime, we'll
No problem. I'm not going anywhere.
But yeah, and you're definitely not going anywhere.
I'm here with
Especially
my fishing buddies, young Bill and young Donald.
see that everyone. That's Donald Fagan, and that's a young Bill. And thankfully, the photograph cuts off at the waist, because we'll never have to ask him the question if he's in his boxer shorts. Or if he's, so okay, this is a very special project that Vibes on Fire of. Forgive my attempted pronunciation, but I'll give it a shot. Guarachera del Mundo. How am I doing?
Close, not bad.
Guarachera del Mundo. And it's a song dedicated to Celia Cruz, poetry lyrics by the great Tado Laviera. And I want to thank Bill Ware for joining me today. And your beautiful spirit, Bill, is, it comes jumping out in the music that we've heard, no matter what it is. But it's such a pleasure to talk to you and to meet you. And I look forward to a day when we can meet in person.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm not setting up your vibes for you. I'm not. I don't have the kind of skill set that Debbie Harry has. All right, so this is the song, and tomorrow I have Antoine Roney joining me, so we'll be catching up with Antoine. And thanks to everyone who listened in and for your questions and comments. Thanks again, Bill.
All right, thank you.
Salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, carillero chunera, azúcar carnaval. Salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, carillero chunera, azúcar carnaval. Negreza mundo, medrena alegría, me da piña reina, reina de bembos colora, compañeros Cecilia, mojito su sazón, su imperio galante, Pedro Knight, mi cabecito de algodón, salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, carillero chunera, azúcar carnaval. Rumbera coquetera, exáctica taconera, bromeante de accesorios, flamboyante vestuario, tumbao de travesuras, quieren candela. Espelucada extravagancia, espectáculo quimbamba, aplauso, adulaciones, exaltaciones a su reinado. Celia Cruz, entrega humilde gracia para ti, azúcar, salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, carinero chunera, azúcar carnaval, salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, carinero chunera, azúcar carnaval. Sonera toda poderosa, diva absoluta, leyenda musical, y a tu lado Lenny Presley More, Gardel, Sinatra, Ellington, Pacheco, Puente el Rey. Con sus claves, con sus ritmos, con sus bailes, las cantamos, las vivimos, histórica fruta voz, sembrada. Kimbara, 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 kimbamba, kimbara, 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 kimbamba, kimbara, 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 kimbamba, kimbara, 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 kimbamba.
Sembrada la potencia celestial, capillada en su Cuba, estrella galardón, antillana, embajadora mundial, humana, contra el cáncer, batallaste y ayudaste, peregrinadora, guarapo, salsa, destilao. Banderines continentales ondeaban sus almas. Sol caliente, muchedumbre, lloraban, cantaban, esperaban sus entradas para saludar tu voz.
Paciencia, honor, orgullo, templo de adoradores, llegaron a parámetro de tu paz y tu descanso. Vestimenta, elegancia, soñando casi viva en su transición. La pena se va cantando, la magnética energía me dio el Señor y lo cuento a mi público corazón. Salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, marinero chunera, azúcar carnaval. Salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, marinero chunera, azúcar carnaval.
Ahora canto en dos universos, ahora canto en dos reinados, sacudiendo mis venas infinitas, navegando para siempre, luz y alegría, 2 días de carnaval, azúcar, carnaval, azúcar, carnaval, azúcar, carnaval, salsera del mundo, guarachera cubana, trajeron su negra, azúcar, carnaval, trajeron su negra, azúcar, carnaval, trajeron su negra, azúcar, carnaval, trajeron su negra, azúcar, carnaval.
Take care, Bill.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.